Wiltshire, England. A fresh trench bit into chalk and clay where no map admitted a passage. 6 researchers stood at its lip with headlamps and field notebooks, while a 7th threaded a reel-to-reel recorder and said, "Slate, Expedition 1. The official report would later call what they found a Roman corridor of unusual finish. The recovered tape says otherwise. At minute 2, voices thicken as if spoken through water. At minute 3, someone starts to breathe like an old man. At minute 4, the lens catches the impossible, a strand of hair bleaching under light, one filament turning white as frost climbs a window. The tunnel is not carved, it is grown smooth. No chisel scars, no mortar, no tool marks. Angles look true until the frame bends at the edges, as if geometry falters under weight. Radios die on the threshold, watches stall, then sprint. A young geologist says he can feel the weather of years in his knee and laughs to make it smaller. The microphone traps a low thud between 28 and 32 beats per minute, a pulse too large for one chest, too steady for machines left in the earth. There is a cut. When the picture returns, a man stumbles into daylight with skin thinned like paper, veins lifted, eyes hollowed by decades that were not there minutes before. He shapes a name that does not fit in his mouth. He drops to his knees. Behind him, the dark seems to breathe. Hours later, the survivor will die on the surface, aged another 40 years. The ministry will pour concrete and silence. But one reel will not obey. It will come back with a whisper none of the team recorded. He's hungry. This is the file they sealed. We are breaking the wax. The hillside gave way after heavy rain. What slipped was not just soil, but a narrative. A seam in the English countryside where the past pushes through like a bone. The council called in a university team, who called in a cameraman, who called home and said he would be late for supper. They found a passage where no parish record, no Roman itinerary, no military survey had ever drawn a line. The stone was seamless and damp, colder than air by 2 degrees, humming in a register that turns men honest or afraid. At the threshold, radios fell quiet. On the far side, time did not behave. They spent 3 minutes in that chamber. They came out older. Witnesses who do not exist on paper remember faces collapsing by increments, a whitening at the temple, a wrinkle carved while a sentence was being formed, a voice deepening to a gravel that tasted of dust. The youngest, still young when he laughed, reached the surface and aged again. His medical record will never be produced. The site was sealed with concrete and a number. The reel was supposed to burn. It did not. You are watching The Lost Expeditions. We do not invent what should frighten you. We exhume what was buried with instructions. In this episode, we reconstruct the descent minute by minute, align testimony with diagrams, and play you a fragment the ministry misfiled as magnetic failure. Some hear a fault in tape, others hear a heartbeat. We hear a lead. If you believe forgotten work deserves air, subscribe now and ring the bell. Comment, "I'd listen," or "No chance," so we know who walks with us. What follows is not a ghost story. It is a field note from the edge of a map. Breathe. We are going down. The hillside gave way after heavy rain. What slipped was not just soil, but a narrative. A seam in the English countryside where the past pushes through like a bone. The council called in a university team, who called in a cameraman, who called home and said he would be late for supper. They found a passage where no parish record, no Roman itinerary, no military survey had ever drawn a line. The stone was seamless and damp, colder than air by 2 degrees, humming in a register that turns men honest or afraid. At the threshold, radios fell quiet. On the far side, time did not behave. They spent 3 minutes in that chamber. They came out older. Witnesses who do not exist on paper remember faces collapsing by increments, a whitening at the temple, a wrinkle carved while a sentence was being formed, a voice deepening to a gravel that tasted of dust. The youngest, still young when he laughed, reached the surface and aged again. His medical record will never be produced. The site was sealed with concrete and a number. The reel was supposed to burn. It did not. You are watching The Lost Expeditions. We do not invent what should frighten you. We exhume what was buried with instructions. In this episode, we reconstruct the descent minute by minute, align testimony with diagrams, and play you a fragment the ministry misfiled as magnetic failure. Some hear a fault in tape. Others hear a heartbeat. We hear a lead. If you believe forgotten work deserves air, subscribe now and ring the bell. Comment, "I'd listen," or "No chance," so we know who walks with us. What follows is not a ghost story. It is a field note from the edge of a map. Breathe. We are going down. Older, Mary supplied, because if you name a thing, you can sometimes keep it. Dale kept rolling, because rolling was the only honest act left to him. The camera drank light and spat it out as evidence. In the viewfinder, the world bowed at the edges, then corrected as if the tunnel's writ ended at the chalk. Behind Lowe, the dark breathed once more, a slow, almost courtly pulse, like a creature asleep and eminently patient. They moved with the deliberation that follows shock. Not quick enough to be surrender, not slow enough to be denial. Hands appeared. Council, crew, chance men who had been standing at the edge of history and found themselves recruited to lift it. Lowe's boot slipped in clay. 3 palms caught him with the gentleness reserved for the very young and the very old. He made a sound like a question and did not ask it again. They laid him on a canvas sling that had been meant for equipment, not men, and the fibers creaked with a note that would live in Dale's dreams. Mary took Lowe's pulse and felt her own instead for a beat, then found his. Fast, then slow, then a steadying that was no comfort because steadiness felt like resignation. She counted anyway and wrote a number that would embarrass her later. Above them, the sky had not changed. England held to its grey. A rook called from the hedgerow with the abstract disdain of birds. Somebody's thermos rolled and thumped against a spade. The ordinary wanted to reassert itself and could not find room in the morning. "Hospital," Kent said. "Now." He did not look back into the tunnel. He did not need to. He had the sensation, more precise than thought, that to turn would be to agree to a conversation he was not prepared to survive. They carried Lowe towards the road where a Land Rover waited with its back open like a mouth. Each step away from the chalk line lightened the air. Each step away added a year to the idea that this could still be made sense of. Dale, forced at last to lower the camera to climb, felt as if he had put down a shield. At the lip of the trench, Lowe opened his eyes wide and said a name. It might have been his mother's. It might have been the name of the thing at the end of the corridor. The syllables did not belong to English. They had the shape of a word you don't pronounce inside buildings. Mary did not write it down. They lifted him into the vehicle, and the suspension groaned. The driver, a man drafted from the council's maintenance yard who will never speak about this without a laugh that dies in his mouth, started the engine. The Land Rover took the track rutted by rainfall and left the field. Behind them, men in coats discussed concrete the way bakers discuss flour. A decision was already taking on the shape of a pour. Dale looked back once and saw, just before the trench lip cut off his view, the chalk line inside the tunnel gleam as if wet, then dry, then look like it had always been there and always would be. The air above it trembled slightly, the way heat makes a road shiver in summer. He blinked and the shiver was gone. He wished for a fault in the lens to blame. He wished for anything small and breakable. By the time they reached the lane, Lowe's hair had found more winter. The lines at his mouth had deepened as if a calculation were being written there by a hand interested in balance. He asked for water again. They gave him some. He swallowed. closed his eyes and slept in a way that had no youth in it. At the sight, Kent stood at the threshold and listened to a place learn his name. He drew a line in his field book so straight it could have cut the page. He closed the book, put it in his pocket, and told the councilmen what they wanted to hear: that the passage was unstable, that collapse was imminent, that they required a brace, a barrier, a pause. He gave them nouns because men with trucks and cement obey nouns. The tape kept rolling on a crate where Dale had set the reel-to-reel when he lifted the camera. No one had pressed stop. The microphone lay pointed into the mouth of the tunnel. On the tape, the field will hear chalk crunch under boots, a rook call, a thermos roll, the distant mutter of an engine leaving. Then, under the hiss any engineer will shrug at, a sound will arrive between 28 and 32 beats per minute, steady as tide, patient as sleep. The sound will not remain on one channel but wander like a hand testing the edges of a room, finding seams. At 08:27 by Mary's book, which is not the same as 08:27 by Kent's watch, the pulse will pause for the length of a breath, and a whisper will take its place. The whisper will not be a word, unless hunger is a language that does not require dictionaries. He's hungry, the transcript will say, later, when men in other rooms decide what letters will carry blame. In the field, at the lip of the wrong corridor, Kent said, "Seal it." And the men with trucks nodded, because it is a comfort to be asked to do something you can do. The first load of concrete was scheduled for afternoon. Until then, the chalk would stand as a poor man's gate, a line between two governance systems, law and appetite. Mary closed her book. She did not underline the time. She turned to the trench and, without thinking, pressed her palm to the soil that had slipped and revealed this. The earth was warmer than the stone by more than 2 degrees. It did not hum. Behind her, the tunnel breathed once in, out, like a sleeping animal untroubled by insects. She did not turn. She walked toward the lane where the Land Rover had gone and did not hurry, because hurry is a confession, and there are things you do not confess to rooms that listen. They took the B Road west toward the district hospital, a ribbon of tarmac rattling the Land Rover like the inside of a drum. Lowe lay on the canvas sling, boots still muddy, hands fanned across his ribs as if he were keeping something inside from falling out. The driver kept a third and pretended he didn't see the rearview mirror. Kent sat backward on the bench, one hand braced on the wheel arch, the other on Lowe's shoulder. The way you hold a sleeping child on a bus that keeps missing potholes, it should have learned by now. "Count," Mary said, leaning over so her hair fell like a curtain that hid him from the world for a second. "Phil, with me. In for 4, out for 6. He matched her once, twice, then drifted. His breath was not short so much as parsimonious, as if oxygen were an allowance he didn't want to waste. The skin at his temple had taken on the color of old paper kept in a drawer that is opened often enough to remind you what you're avoiding. Dale watched through the lens for 2 seconds before he hated himself and lowered the camera into his lap. He looked at Mary's field book instead, because numbers forgive. "Time," she said without looking up. "Note the time." "08:41, Kent answered from his watch. 08:39, Mary said from hers. Lowe opened his eyes and looked at the roof of the vehicle as though the universe had been redrawn with too few lines. "His watch is fast," he said, which was funny because his mouth could no longer find the right shape for jokes, and because both watches were wrong in exactly the ways that hurt. He tried to smile to show he knew it. The smile chose a different decade to belong to. Traffic was thin, the county had chores elsewhere. Hedges leaned into the lane like nosy old men. The odd rook hopped sideways at the verge, vexed about nothing. They passed a lay-by where a lorry driver smoked and stared, and Lowe, who had kept his eyes on the roof, turned his head to the window not to see scenery, but to be certain the world was still outside. He blinked as if his eyelids had acquired resistance. "Hospital's 10, the driver said, meaning minutes. He wanted to be useful. Maybe 8. 7, Kent said. Not because he was sure, but because certainty is a drug you keep in your pocket for the worst walks. Mary dug in her satchel for the small things that feel large when everything else fails. Salt tabs, a pair of nitrile gloves folded flat, a pencil sharpened to the length of a finger. She didn't put on the gloves. Touch was data. She pressed her thumb gently into the skin at Lowe's forearm and counted the time the pallor needed to refill. Capillary refill delayed, she said to the air. She didn't write it down. Thready radial. Rate erratic. Temperature? Kent asked. Forehead hot, extremities cold. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear that did not need tucking. Phil, she said again, the name like a rope thrown across something moving water would like to have. Present, he whispered. And then, to his own surprise, sir, as if Kent were a schoolmaster and the truck a classroom. The honorific embarrassed him, and in the embarrassment there was a boy you could still see, even if the face did not agree. Very good, Kent said, because sometimes you choose to meet a man on the ground he can still stand on. They reached A&E with tires singing over the hospital car park's molded gravel. The doors were already propped. The driver had radioed ahead with words like collapse and field incident. And then the word he was told to say in emergencies, which was research. Research gets you through green faster than blood when the district knows who you are. Orderlies came with a trolley. A registrar with a kind face made of angles asked for names and got them. A nurse with forearms like oak and a voice that was a policy guided Lowe's sling to the bed with gentleness that made Mary's eyes sting. She turned away and looked at a poster about hand washing. How long has he been like this? The registrar asked, snapping the cuff around Lowe's arm, eyes moving instead of hands. He had done this long enough to let one part learn the dance while the other read the room. Minutes, Kent said. The registrar glanced up at that. Minutes since what? Minutes since he entered a chamber underground and then exited it, Mary said, before she could decide if this was the moment to begin lying for the public good. He was 29 at the trench. The registrar stopped. Not theatrically, not even visually. Something in the wrists paused. He tightened the cuff, released, watched the needle pretend. He drew a breath like an investment. Onset of symptoms was acute then. Acute, Kent said, grateful to have a word on the table that wasn't witchcraft. The nurse set a pulse oximeter and frowned at nothing. Lowe looked at the ceiling and said a single syllable that might have been a vowel from a name nobody wanted to hear again. Let's get him into races, she said, which is Hampshire for we don't know and we won't guess in the corridor. They pushed. Doors learned to open. The bed learned to roll. Dale kept pace at the frame until a second nurse, equally oak, equally policy, put up a palm that conveyed law without needing to say it. Family only, she said. Or, Kent said. Or the person who can tell me where he's been and what he's been exposed to, she said, with that county briskness that makes you feel seen and ushered at once. That's me, Kent said. Then keep up, she said, and did not look back to see if he had. They wired Lowe in the resus bay as if wiring could catch time in a net. The monitors tried to choose a rhythm for him. His pulse refused the menu. An SHO asked about drugs, poisons, gases. Mary answered with a string of no's that sounded like prayers said too late. The registrar peered at a sclera that had no jaundice to offer, pinched skin that tented and returned, frowned at a temperature that could not explain heat in the nerves and cold in the hands. How old are you, Mr. Lowe? He asked softly, leaning in so that if the answer hurt, it would hurt only the few. 20, Lowe said, and discovered subtraction had become a kind of grief. He laughed, rather beautifully, and then remembered that the laugh he loved in himself didn't live in this throat yet. 29, Mary supplied, as of this morning. The registrar wrote nothing for a second, then wrote anyway, because the chart must contain something. Any known conditions? He runs hills for pleasure, Kent said. Not today, Lowe said, the joke finding its way to him late and small. His eyes shone with water he had not asked for. They drew blood, and it gave itself up slowly, reluctant as molasses in winter. The lab would return later with markers that suggested nothing was wrong in ways that felt like an insult. While they waited, the nurse warmed his hands and rubbed a small circle on his sternum to coax breath toward evenness. "You're in good hands," she said, which is the right sentence when truth is limited by inventory. Outside the bay, the hospital gathered the way churches gather around a rumor, quietly, with expertise disguised as chat. A porter said he'd never seen a council rover come in that fast. A consultant with an appetite for puzzles stood with a coffee and did not drink it. A clerk put two forms side by side, then stapled neither, then thought about soup. In the corridor 3 doors down, a man in a suit arrived without walking like the others. Men in suits walk differently when they are not doctors and not clergy, and still expect access granted at both doors. He spoke to reception, then to nobody in particular, then very specifically to Kent, whom he found by asking for the man who seemed to be saying less than he knew. "Dr. Kent," the suit said, presenting a card too quickly to be read. "We've had a call." "We called," Kent said. It was true enough. He had rung a number that had no name, a debt you carry with the kind of work that takes you into the soil on behalf of people who think history stays where you leave it. "Then we've answered," the suit said, smiling with one corner of his mouth only, as if the other had been told not to participate in anything cheerful. "How is our man?" "Alive," Kent said. "For now," the suit said, and the way he said it made Mary choose to dislike him efficiently and without ornament. "We'll need the site secured." "The council is arranging concrete," Kent said. "Very good," the suit said, meaning, "We asked before you told." "We'll assist with cordon and access control. Your notes, Doctor." "Not without a receipt," Mary said, and smiled in a way that would have read as sweet if you had not been the kind of man who collects receipts for a living. He turned the smile toward her with the care you use when handling a blade. "And you are Pharaoh," she said. "The one with the book you're not getting." "Yet," he said, as if all things were inevitably his with enough calendar. "We'll require a full account of exposure duration and symptom onset." "You can have my voice," Kent said, "not my drafts." "And the recording?" he said, finally asking for the only thing in the room with the power to insist the world admit to more than gossip. Dale had the reel-to-reel in his lap, the microphone wrapped in a handkerchief as if it were a hand with a wound. He had already, quietly, just once, pressed play and then stop. Enough to confirm that the hiss belonged to a living thing he could not name. He hugged the machine the way fishermen hug small children brought aboard with bad weather coming. "We'll let you hear it," Dale said, "when I am in the room where you hear it." "Chain of custody," the suit said, approving of the phrase as if it were a password that made him a member of a club he already owned. "Name," Mary said, because it had become unbearable to talk to a man who pretended to be a noun. "Parks," he said, "Civil Contingencies Liaison." "Which is to say ministry without tattoos," Mary said, and Kent did not smile because he needed the man and needed Mary and needed the distance between them to be a matter of diction, not treason. "Doctor," Parks said, turning away only when he had catalogued the arrangement of loyalties in the room, "we'll keep your man breathing if breath is on offer." As if summoned by the audacity of that sentence, Lowe coughed, one harsh bark that had none of the wet you fear and all of the age you don't expect, and then said, clear as a bell rung very far away, "It's still breathing." "Who?" the nurse asked, leaning in because she had been taught you can borrow nouns from the dying to anchor them to the shore. "The room," he said. "The room is breathing." The registrar looked at Kent, not to ask if this was metaphor, but to measure the gap between what doctors call delirium and what witnesses call fact when they have nowhere else to store it. Kent did not look away. "He's correct," he said. "It breathes." They moved low to an observation ward because Ressus is built for thresholds, not narratives. Curtains pulled and pushed, beds adjusted. A volunteer brought water nobody would drink. Mary went to the lavatory and washed her hands 3 times with the soap that hospitals own, the kind that smells like promises that cannot be kept. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman who had seen something she could not name and was now tasked with describing it to men who owned forms. She dried her hands and did not cry. Parks arranged the immediate world the way men like him arrange worlds. Phone calls that produce vans, vans that produce tape, tape that produces lines on tarmac that produce authority. He spoke to the registrar with respect shaped to look like cooperation, which is the art his office practices best. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He used words like contain, precaution, and public reassurance, and only once the word anomalous, which he did not enjoy and so put back in his pocket. "Dr. Kent," he said later, in a room the hospital pretends is for families and not for emissaries, "walk me through the minutes." Kent did. He did not make of it a sermon. He placed objects on a table, timestamps, temperature deltas, a compass that misbehaved, a chalk that aged at a human speed when watched and at a geological speed when not. He said the number 28 to 32 beats per minute, and Parks made a small note because numbers soothe suits too. He did not say the word hungry. He left the reel on the chair by Dale's knee and did not glance at it while speaking, the way you do not look at a candle in a room of moths. "Exposure duration," Parks said, pen already poised to make the number behave. 3 minutes, Mary said. 3 minutes, Parks repeated, tasting it against procedures written for gases, for fibers, for spores. He could not make it fit. He made a new column in his notebook and called it effect. Under it he wrote, apparent accelerated senescence. He paused, then added, localized to subject, environment persistent. He had been taught to field strip problems into smaller problems. He field stripped this one and found no screws. "Seal the site," Kent said. "We will," Parks said. "Then we'll unseal it at a time that suits us and nobody else." "I heard you," Kent said. A nurse stepped in with a chart and a softness that did not help. "He's sleeping," she said. "Whatever happens next, he should have this." "What is this?" Parks asked, a man obligated by training to distrust sentences that ask him to leave things untouched. "This is a human being asleep," she said, not looking at him at all. "The rest is paperwork." Kent went back to Lowe's bedside and sat in a chair designed to make sitting short. Hospital chairs are honest about architecture's moral views. He watched Lowe's chest rise and fall, a small tide that had belonged to him since childhood, and now answered a force that could not be graphed. Mary stood at the foot of the bed and watched the clock on the wall ignore everything. "You should eat," Dale said, which is how friends say, "I need you not to shatter." "I can't taste anything in places like this," Mary said. Everything is boiled hope. Greaves and Miller arrived with faces that had learned restraint. They reported that the council had dug a deeper trench around the mouth and set posts. A mixer was on its way. The farmer whose field this had been would be paid to forgive it. A man from the paper had sniffed the lane and been turned by a constable with a gentle hand and a story about drains. "Will concrete do it?" Miller asked, not as a solution, but as a prayer. "Concrete closes doors," Kent said. "Sometimes doors were built to breathe through stone." Parks returned with a consent form no one consented to. He stood at the foot of the bed and looked at Lowe as if he were the physical manifestation of an equation. "We will require the recording," he said, and because he had said it politely, and because the world was not made of separate rooms, Dale nodded once. "In the room," Dale said again, persistent as a river against a cliff. "In the room," Parks agreed, and for a moment sincerity appeared at the corner of his eye, the smallest flicker of a man who would have preferred a different career if someone had told him that walls could exhale. They decamped to a small side office where someone had tried to make fear less efficient by painting the walls a color called spring that only exists in catalogs. Dale set the machine on a desk that had flirted with varnish once and lost. He checked the leads the way you check a friend's pulse in a crowd. Mary pulled a chair close enough that her knee nearly touched the casing. Kent stood because chairs make some men vulnerable. Parks stood because standing is policy. Dale turned the knob to a point he had marked with a penciled dot earlier, volume enough to catch the low registers, not enough to wake the wards. He pressed play. Hiss first. Tape hiss is not neutral. It has the moral authority of age. Then the field, recorded unintentionally at the lip of a thing that did not wish to be an object, the crunch of chalk, a rook, a thermos striking a spade. The reel had made a church of small noises. Then it came, quiet as the footfall of something that does not need floors. A low, regular thud between 28 and 32 beats per minute. It wandered a little, as hearts do when they are not anxious about being judged. It moved across channels like a man testing a room for echoes. Dale closed his eyes to let his skin do the listening. Mary pressed the pencil into her thumb until the wood threatened to bruise. Parks' face had the patience of a man who has taught himself to hear engines fail from across a yard. "Could be vascular artifact," he said, tasting the wrongness of the sentence as he spoke it. "Or the recorder itself." "It's outside the machine's profile," Dale said. Not because he liked the science, but because he needed Parks to believe him the first time. The thud paused, as hearts do when a presence steps into the doorway, and a story decides which tense to choose. In the pause, the room seemed to reconsider the size of the men in it. And then a sound arrived that belonged to none of their chests, none of their mouths, none of their parents' lessons. It was a whisper, not summoned by microphone but admitted by courtesy. The tape gave it a place to sit. Words are hard to hear when they wear someone else's dust. This one wore theirs. The syllables were old wood and air through a reed and a mouth that had practiced hunger until hunger had learned to speak. "He's hungry," the tape said. Dale stopped the reel with a hand that had learned the difference between reflex and reverence. Nobody exhaled until the machine's wheels consented to be still. "How many times have you played that?" Parks asked, as if repetition could make a thing less insolent. "Once," Dale said. "Twice now." "Could be one of yours," Parks said, which was not accusation, not exactly, not in grammar. "A trick of—" "No," Mary said, surprised by the violence of her own voice. She softened it from blade to tool. "No, that voice belongs to something that doesn't waste saliva." Parks worked his jaw the way men work hinges when they check a barn door before weather. "We will need a copy." "You'll have one," Dale said, and Kent did not stop him, because there comes a day when your evidence protects you only by reproducing. They stepped back into the corridor that believed in halogen more than in myth. The nurse with oak in her arms was wheeling in a warmer. She nodded at Kent like a battle standard saluting infantry who have not yet learned whether the charge will be called heroic or foolish. "He's stirring," she said. "He says it's colder." "It isn't," Mary said, but touched Lowe's wrist and found that he was not wrong. They watched his eyelids tremble, a small, indecorous trembling, like an old man trying to be brave in a church where the hymn is not his. He opened them and found Kent first. "Sir," he said again, and now the word had no school in it. It had men with lamps and rules made in the absence of kings. "Yes," Kent said. "It eats time," Lowe said, each consonant set down the way a mason sets stone, slowly enough to keep the wall standing. If you give it yours, you get to leave. Don't speak, the nurse said, kindly and pointlessly. He smiled. Not at her, not at them, but at something that had shown him a part of the map he was not supposed to see. I should have left my watch, he whispered, and then the adjective that frightened Mary more than any of the nouns that had come before. Hungry. Parks put a hand on the end of the bed and forced his own breath to behave. He made himself a promise a younger version of him would have mocked. He would go to the site. He would stand at the seam the chalk had learned to guard. He would not touch. He would not even look long. But he would be present where policy met appetite. He would be there when the first drum of concrete exhaled into the trench and turned to stone. He would decide, in the field and not in a room, if the word seal was end or pause. Doctor, he said to Kent without moving his eyes from low, we will require your continued cooperation. I'm not a door, Kent said. You don't require me. You ask me. I can say yes because a man is dying and a thing we do not understand is breathing under a county that trusts us not to lie to it. Thank you, Parks said, the words sounding like coins that had been polished too often and had lost their faces. Outside, the mixer's drum turned on the road. It sounded like rain on a hot roof. Men in orange would step down and look toward a field where history had tried to keep its mouth shut and failed. A constable would tape the lane not because of law, but because tapes make people quiet. A farmer would cross his arms and count the loss. The sky would not change. In the ward, Lowe slept again, more shallowly. Mary sat with her book and did not write, because writing would require choosing tenses, and she had none to spare. Kent stood at the window and reinterpreted clouds as maps the way men do when sense is a scarce mineral. Dale looked at his hands and wondered if all cameras are sin or if some are sacrament. Greaves and Miller put their heads down on their arms and invented prayers they would forget by night. Parks pulled the blinds a fraction so the light would be kind. The clock on the wall continued to count a version of time the human body had agreed to centuries ago. The tape in the office cooled. The tunnel breathed in a field not a mile away. And in the space that sits between already and not yet, a decision thickened like plaster in a pail, to pour, to close, to call it safe, to tell a story that fit into forms. The first drum arrived at noon. By the time the first mixer turned onto the farm track, the lane had changed jurisdictions 3 times without moving an inch. County tape fluttered. A constable perfected a posture halfway between apology and order. Parks's men in plain coats made a grid out of the air with gestures that looked like conversation and were actually permission. The sky found a lighter gray and held it. As if brightness were an experiment it wasn't prepared to scale. The driver eased the drum to a stop where the hedge opened onto the field. His forearms were corded with the sort of work that outlives fashion. He leaned out of the cab and surveyed the trench, the posts, the new timbers bracing the mouth in a polite wooden cage. You want it runny or righteous? He asked no one in particular, which in Hampshire means, tell me if this is a seal or a sacrifice. Slow pour, Parks said. Layered. We want mass, and we want it to cure like it intends to stay. Copy that, the driver said, and the word copy sounded braver than it had in the radios. Kent stood at the chalk line inside the perimeter and made himself look without blinking. The seam in the floor looked older than it had that morning, as if the tunnel preferred antiquity and had spent the intervening hours acquiring patina. The line of chalk he'd laid as a poor man's gate had fuzzed at the edges and then sharpened again, a heartbeat in mineral. He checked the sling thermometer, 2 degrees lower than the air. He placed the compass on a flat stone, 1/2 degree off north, then true, then off again, like a mind deciding. Mary returned from the hospital in a car that smelled faintly of raincoats. She carried no book now. She had hidden it where men like Parks could not inventory it without trespassing on an old woman's good opinion. She looked ghost-pale but present. "He slept," she said to Kent, meaning low. "He said 3 sentences and borrowed all the centuries in them. Then he slept." "What sentences?" "It eats time. I should have left my watch. Hungry." She rubbed her thumb and forefinger together, a habit that makes graphite shine on skin months after the notebook is shut. "How long before the pour?" "Now," Park said, and nodded to the driver. The chute swung, and the first mouthful of concrete found the lip of the trench, with the wet slap of a promise turned into policy. It spread into the undercut like a body finding the shape of a bath, then settled, then trembled in a way that belonged to trucks and not to mouths in the ground. Men with rakes stepped, careful, boot to board, and drew the slurry into corners archaeology does not usually name. Cement dust rose, then thought better of it. Cool air pushed it down. "Slow," Kent said. "Let it find itself." The driver closed a lever a hair. The flow subsided to a thick tongue that licked the edge and withdrew. The men in coats relaxed by increments invisible to anyone who hadn't been watching them since morning. The constable at the tape had a sip of tea he'd left too long in the cup. The farmer calculated a number that would make him feel dignified about damage. They poured in 3 passes. Between passes, they waited, because impatience makes bad stone and worse decisions. Parks walked the perimeter slow, shoes wet with a memory of chalk. He stopped where the thicket opened, as if someone had called his name from inside a hedge he hadn't been designed to enter. He listened. The sound was there, the low thud, the big animal's heart, muted now by distance and fresh mass. He tried the trick of telling himself it was a truck idling, an engine rotating in obedient circles. The lie didn't fit. The rhythm lacked the mechanical arrogance of machines. It had the patience of organs that began before fathers learned their sons' names. "Do you hear it?" he asked, because he needed a voice outside his skull to say yes or no. "Yes," Mary said, and did not soften the word with charity. "And it will keep breathing after we lay road on top of it and plant a hedge. It will breathe until the map forgets again." He wrote nothing. He had a pocket notebook and a pen that had learned to say proper nouns with exact spelling. He did not remove them. "There are places like this," he said, as if the statement might distribute responsibility across counties and prevent any one man from owning what lay here. "No," Kent said mildly. "There are places. There is no like." The second pass went in cleaner than the first, the crew having acquired the language of the poor. The drum's rotation slowed. The chute glittered with a skin of paste that sunshine might have made pretty if sunshine had any votes on English afternoons. A rook landed on a fence post and was surprised into stillness by how many men can stand together and still seem alone. "Temperature?" Parks asked, adopting the method of borrowing other people's instruments to feel less like a tourist with a map. 2 degrees under ambient at the seam," Mary said, her voice tired enough to put the number to bed. "Hold this." She passed him the compass. It wobbled and then decided not to. "Tell me you've seen this before," Parks said, not pleading exactly, petitioning. "I've seen men make order around big holes," Kent said. "I've seen order leak. If you want comfort, concrete is as honest as we get." The third pass. The trench took the load without mutiny. The surface smoothed under rakes into a quiet that impersonated control. The driver braced a plank alongside to catch drip, then wiped his hands on a rag that had been shirts in kinder years. "Your seal," he said. "You let it cure. It'll keep your ghosts where you prefer them." Mary put a knuckle against the new slab and felt coolness speak through skin. "You know," she said to no one in particular, "it's older than we are." "Everything is," the farmer said from the hedge, and nodded like a man who has managed cows through winter and is unimpressed by most nouns that frighten townsmen. Parks deployed a cordon in a language made of cones and public notices. The notice called the site a structural hazard during stabilization. It offered a phone number that routed to an office that routed to a human who routed back to silence. He placed 2 men at the lane for the afternoon and wrote in his book a line that looked like the sort of future that can be rescheduled. He tried not to look at the slab while it learned to be rock. "Back to the hospital," Kent said. "We keep 2 watches. It doesn't get one of them." "Agreed," Park said. "I'll stay here until dusk and not pretend it means anything noble." They left him standing inside the tape with a cup the constable had brought without being asked. He tilted the cup under his nose. Salt, cedar, a memory of smoke from the last house fire drill he'd stood too near. He drank and let the heat climb his mouth. He listened to a sound he would later pretend to colleagues was a lorry beyond the lane, and to himself was a thing he had not been paid to hear. At the hospital, Lowe's bed had discovered the trick of waiting without progress. The registrar had moved from verbs like stabilize to nouns like observation, which is what medicine calls belief when it refuses to declare a god. The nurse with oak in her arms had found an extra blanket that had been washed enough times to forget any house it had ever belonged to. She tucked it with the tenderness you reserve for strangers who enter your care with stories you don't have shelves for. He woke. The waking had no ceremony. It rose through him like cold through boards, slow and entire. "How long?" he said. And the sentence came out complete, which surprised all 3 of them, Mary, the nurse, the registrar, into the kind of thankful silence that makes rooms gentle. "Hours," Mary said. 6 since the sight. Perhaps 7. He looked not at the clock, but at her mouth, as if time could be read better in the corners where truth hides from duty. "It will cost more," he said. "Even here. We're very boring here," the registrar said, and smiled because men in white coats are taught to practice that expression in mirrors so that patients will mistake craft for comfort. Lowe lifted his hand with the obedience of men who have been taught that effort attracts applause. The skin on the back showed the lattice work that grandfather's hands learn. The small rivers of vessels that your mother traces when you are small and say, "Where do I go when I sleep?" He turned the palm up. The whorls were the same as at 29. A child's party trick had not changed. He took some inventory, wrist, elbow, shoulder, a sweep of ribs. He closed his eyes to catch breath. He opened them again. "I don't want to be brave," he said, into the room as if confession had finally found him. "I'll be good." "I won't be brave. You don't owe us bravery," Mary said. "I owe the room," he whispered, and then surprised himself by laughing once, small and honest. "I owe it nothing." Parks rang from the field. "Set," he said when Kent stepped into the corridor with the phone that still trusted wires. "Slab down, cure under watch. We'll return with ground penetrating when the calendar allows me to win a committee I don't want to enter." "It's still breathing," Kent said, and did not make it a question. "It is," Park said, quieter, as if we've put a blanket over a sleeping dog. It doesn't make the animal less a dog. "Come down," Kent said. "See him." "I was going to avoid that," Park said. "He meant, I am the apparatus that moves trucks and signatures. I cannot be the witness." "Come down," Kent repeated. He did not raise his voice. He had learned in caves that volume fails where gravity reigns. Parks came. He stood at the foot of the bed with the discomfort of a man who only likes rooms with agendas. He looked at Lowe, then at the monitor as if one might make the other tidy. "Mr. Lowe," he said, and his politeness failed to hide the complicated pity in the syllables. Lowe smiled in the way men smile when they are polite to people they will never see in another decade. "You poured it," he said. It wasn't a question. News travels through stone faster than gossip travels through pubs. "We poured it," Park said. "Tell me something about inside that isn't a story made to frighten children. It is very clean." Lowe said after thinking. Not like a hospital, like equipment that thinks about hands. He moved his own fingers as if to demonstrate a concept nobody else would learn. And the sound is not in the ear, it is in the jaw. If you close your mouth and put your teeth together, you can feel. He stopped. The breath between sentences demanded a toll. Enough, the nurse said. It was an order with a soft bow on it. Parks took one step closer, drawn as men are when they have failed to keep one foot in abstraction. Why did you hesitate at the line? He asked. He sounded like his better self for a moment, curious without hunting. Lowe looked past him to the window where clouds had invented a small republic of light. I thought it said my name, he said. And I was ashamed for wanting to hear it again. Parks took the blow like a man who has learned to accept pain for information. He stepped back. He nodded once to Kent, not in gratitude, but in the surrender of a man who has been drafted by facts. We will need analysis tonight, he said, meaning the real. Spectrogram, filters, all the tricks I will be told not to trust and will trust anyway. In my lab, Dale said from the doorway. He had turned up like a bad penny and refused to spend elsewhere. Not yours. Yours, Parks said, surprising himself by relinquishing at least one room. But I'll be there, chain of custody. And because I do not intend to be the man who sends second-hand ghosts to committees. They convened after dusk in the media room at the university. The room smelled of warm dust and varnish, like a library that had tried theater once in the 60s and never forgave itself. Dale set the reel-to-reel on a cart that rolled with the dignity of old equipment. He ran leads to a pair of studio monitors that had outlived fashions. He threaded tape with the courtesy of a priest vesting a chalice. Mary checked wall clocks against wristwatches against a small metronome she had stolen from a piano teacher's grave or an office supply cabinet, no one asked which. Kent dimmed the house lights until the walls receded. Parks stood in the back with his hands behind his back, an old-school posture that convinced nobody that he belonged in classrooms. A graduate assistant named Colin hunched over a scope and a 4-track with the piety of youth worshipping R&D. Play, Dale said to himself, then out loud. He pressed the button that reduces waiting to sound. Hiss, then field. The chalk, the rook, the thermos, the low thud. Colin ran the signal into the scope, and the scope drew the world in a green line that wavered with patience. 28 to 32, he said quietly, as if saying it at library level might make the number less likely to salt the earth. Bandpass between 20 and 50, Mary said. Let's hear what lives there. Colin nodded, twisted knobs, slid faders. The room concentrated the way ships do when fog appears. Less light, more listening. The heartbeat came forward the way a remembered pain does when you poke it. It wandered left, right, center, like a sound, checking the dimensions of a throat. Dale closed his eyes again because vision is a vulgar sense in rooms that want you to attend to pulse. Now the pause, Kent said, not pointing at the tape counter because he refused to pretend the machine was intimate with time. Wait for it. The heartbeat paused. It did not slow. It stopped, as if the room had taken a breath, as if mass itself wanted to taste. On the tape, the hiss widened to make space. Into the quiet. As before, a whisper entered like a man who knows the key to a church and doesn't need to cough for authority. He's hungry, the room heard, and in the green line on the scope, Colin saw the waveform of a mouth the size of a hall. He zoomed. He could not see lips or teeth, only the shape of a phrase that had learned currency in human throats and now spent it without scruple. Spectral, Mary said, because naming and analysis were the only two tools she had that didn't break under weight. Colin printed the spectrogram, and the printer spat paper with the drama of a train being born. Black bands and pale bands told a story in which consonants survive translation better than vowels. The hiss is not empty, he said, There's structure in it, like breath between notes. Artifact, Parks offered, out of duty to the men who would require him to say the word at least once. He didn't believe it, and the belief made him kinder in tone. Every artifact is a thing made, Kent said. Question is, by whom? They played it again at lower volume, as if the sound might mistake respect for surrender. It didn't. It sat in the room like a guest, not in need of chair or wine, perfectly capable of waiting out generations on the strength of its one good story. Dale pressed stop. He's a man who loves machines, and machines love being asked to rest by men who love them. What did you feel in your bones? Mary asked, turning to Kent, and to her own surprise to Parks as well. In the tunnel, Parks said. He tried to lie efficiently and could not. Teeth, he said finally. I felt it in my teeth, as if biting down would tell me what calendar the world was using. Jaw, Kent said. Same. And here. He pressed a knuckle to his sternum, as if it wanted entrance, the way water wants downhill. Colin raised a hopeful finger. If we could get a generator to the site and... No, Parks and Kent said together, and then looked at each other as if embarrassed by harmony. Parks spoke first. We will not feed it electricity without a docket I can hang a career on, and I am not acquiring such a docket before breakfast. We will not pretend it is a machine, Kent said. We will not win that pretense. We will only lose better. They stood in the quiet that follows a first communion with something that does not care for appetite above soil. Outside, the campus had gone to sodium lights and foxes. Inside, Colin printed another spectrogram because humans always want a second copy of the document that makes the world worse. The phone on the wall rang the way phones in old movies ring when the plot decides rooms need commands. Parks crossed, lifted, said his name as if it could protect him. He listened. He clicked his pen twice without registering sound. He covered the mouthpiece with his palm and looked at Kent. Hospital, he said. Change. They went as if their feet had found a map they had been memorizing unawares. The road to A&E had learned their names already. The nurse with oak for arms met them at the door with a face that had put on armor and left its softness in a pocket to retrieve if the night allowed. He's awake, she said, and older. How much? Parks said, as if he were buying grain. Enough that you will not lie to yourselves, she said. She looked at Mary with sympathy, edged like a scalpel. He wants you. They stepped into the ward that believed in curtains. Low lay where they had left him, but closer to a shore nobody had pointed out on a chart. The architecture of his face had completed some program the tunnel had authored. He was handsome in the way old faces are handsome. The bones had found their argument, and the argument had outlived fashion. He smiled. The smile was the same as his morning smile. It had traveled. Sir, he said to Kent. Then to Mary. You brought the book. I did, she said, though she had not. She had brought the habit of believing her own notes even when the world required other kinds of paper. I can hear it through the wall, he said. It is farther away than it was. Concrete is a blanket. He closed his eyes as if tasting. But blanket's warm. Kent took his hand because the architecture of rooms cannot handle men who do not take other men's hands when offered. We will not go back in, he said, and thought of the chalk line and the men in coats and the rook and the farmer and the concrete thinking about becoming stone. Lowe opened his eyes and found Parks. You poured, he said again. We did, Parks said. He had run out of ways to hide sincerity without lying. He didn't lie. We will listen now, in rooms that think they can hold it. It will wait, Lowe said. It is very patient. He slept. Or he traveled to the place where sleep and elsewhere overlap. The nurse adjusted the blanket with the care of women who have buried worse. She looked at Parks with the contempt she reserves for systems and the fleeting kindness she reserves for men who try to be better than their rank. "Tomorrow," Parks said to Kent in the corridor, "we convene in a room with white walls. We say the words that make other men agree to keep tape on the lane. We write a paragraph that calls this structural anomaly of indeterminate origin, and we put the words public safety in it 3 times. Then we deliver copies to the people who need copies in order to wake without nightmares." "And tonight?" Mary asked. "Tonight we do not go near it," Parks said. "Tonight we pretend that blankets are morals. We give it nothing to eat." The hospital lights dimmed to the version of night hospitals call mercy. The field in Wiltshire cooled. The slab breathed its own chemistry as aggregates married paste and swore to be inseparable until frost undid them. Underneath, stone rested its jaw against new weight, the way old dogs rest against doorframes they have known since puphood. The rook slept in a hedge and dreamed of theft. The farmer counted another number and adjusted it a shilling. The constable shook his feet to wake them and remembered that his mother had told him never to whistle after dark. He didn't. In the media room, the reel lay where Dale had left it, wound to the beginning of the whisper. Colin turned off the scope and watched the green line fall into the dark with the clean finality of a curtain. He put the printouts in a folder and labeled it with a pencil that needed sharpening. Wiltshire, 1968, tape A. He did not lock the drawer because drawers do not keep faith, and locks to keep ghosts out require religion, not hardware. Mary sat at the foot of Lowe's bed and did not write. Kent sat by the window and invented a way to say the word hungry to men who will only accept it if it is spelled with Latin. Parks stood outside under the portico and lit a cigarette he would not finish, because the part of him that makes rules for others remembers the rules he makes for himself. He flicked the match into a puddle and watched the tiny hiss pretend to be victory. At midnight by the hospital's clock, and some other time by whatever the tunnel used, the ward grew as quiet as brick. Lowe opened his eyes one more time and spoke to the dark. "It asked my name," he said. "I didn't give it. That is the only thing I've done right today." No one answered. Rooms that listen know when to hold breath. The council chamber that morning smelled like carpet cleaner and apologies. They had dragged in a projector nobody loved, arranged glass jugs of water that made men pour out their nerves, and taped a notice on the door that read, "Public safety briefing because truth requires camouflage when it travels by daylight." Parks stood at the head of the long table with his folder closed, the way men stand when their authority is a coat they cannot quite shrug into. Kent sat 2 chairs down with a legal pad he did not intend to use. Mary held nothing. Her hands were the only archive she trusted in certain rooms. Dale had the reel in a neutral canvas bag, the neutrality of canvas being a doctrine in British meetings. Greaves and Miller sat together, sleeves rolled, faces arranged in the expression men wear to funerals for people they did not know well, but liked on principle. A counsellor with a vowel like a brass doorknob cleared his throat. "We appreciate everyone attending on such short notice." He meant the phone rang after supper, and the voice on the line used nouns that make careers fragile. "We've received reports of an incident connected to the excavation near—" "Call it a tunnel," Mary said, calm as a scalpel. "Incident is what you call a kettle boiled dry." Parks lifted his palm a fraction. "We'll make a record, then we'll make decisions." He nodded to Dale. The projector came to life with the doomed courage of old equipment. Dale didn't use it. He set the reel-to-reel on the table and placed the 2 studio monitors as if he were installing patience in a room that had mislaid it. He threaded the tape slowly so men could see his hands, so no one could accuse the machine of conjuring. When he leaned on the volume knob, the whole chamber leaned with him, as if the furniture had been designed for deference. Hiss first, The chamber flinched because hiss invokes age, and age makes voters troublesome. Then the field. Chalk, rook, thermos, then the low thud at 2832 beats per minute, wandering the stereo field like a man measuring the height of a ceiling he can reach by raising his hand. The counselor glanced at Parks as if to ask if this was allowed. Parks stared at the speaker and did not nod. The thud paused. The hiss widened, and into it came the whisper that had learned its one useful sentence and intended to spend it on every room that granted it the courtesy of silence. "He's hungry," the tape said. Someone knocked over a glass. Someone else said, "Christ," in a way that made the word smaller than it had been a moment before. Dale stopped the tape, where he always stopped it because liturgies are what keep men from breaking. "Spectrographic analysis confirms it's not machine artifact," Mary said before anyone asked. "We can argue about who speaks, not if something does." The counselor found his tongue. "Public safety concerns are, of course, our first priority. We'll want to reassure the parish." "Reassure them of what?" Greaves asked, polite and lethal. "That the ground politely declines to eat them before Sunday roast?" Parks opened his folder. Inside was the document committee's breed when frightened, a paragraph with rounded edges. He read it in a voice that sounded like it came with stamps. "Structural anomaly of indeterminate origin uncovered during routine maintenance. Site secured. Access restricted pending stabilization. No ongoing risk to public." He did not look up. If he did, he might see Mary's face and the paragraph would die of shame. Kent folded his hands. "We will not say no ongoing risk." Parks glanced up. "We must." "We must not," Kent said, quietly enough that the room had to lean toward him to hear and thus learned posture. "We can say no immediate hazard. We cannot pretend we understand duration." The counselor picked up a pencil as if picking up a weapon. "Is there a chemical risk? Gas? Contaminants? A leak from—" "No," Mary said. "If there were, our bones wouldn't hum." "Your bones," the counselor began, and then remembered his body and sat back. A man from Highways, who had been trying to be invisible because he detested meetings, raised one finger. "The slab will cure by evening," he said. "We can lay steel plate tomorrow if you want a road there that doesn't confess what it covers." "And then?" Miller asked. "And then we drive over it until the hedge grows back," the man said, the faith of engineers making a vow to physics. "We'll also deploy a ground-penetrating unit," Park said, adding a phrase committees accept because it has hyphens and therefore credentials. "We'll look without touching. We'll publish nothing until we can publish everything without being asked for detail." The counselor exhaled, grateful for the verbs deploy, look, publish, verbs like scaffolding. "And the hospital?" Kent's eyes moved. "He's present." "Stable?" the counselor asked, pleading for a word that could be stapled. "Stable," Kent said, "and let the lie live until dinner because men in rooms like this require paper armor to leave the building." Parks closed the folder as if handling a quiet animal. "We will keep the cordon overnight," he said. "Constables on the lane, 2 men at the field. No entry without my authorization or Dr. Kent's. The fewer feet we ask the ground to learn, the better." "And the tape?" the counselor asked. "Remains with us," Parks said. "Chain of custody. There is nothing to hide." He said the last sentence in the ancient tone of British bureaucracy, where there is nothing to hide always means there is at least one thing you will not be permitted to see. They adjourned to the corridor where sunlight made a brave attempt to rehabilitate the building's taste. Mary leaned on the sill and watched one bee ignore a municipal flowerbed like a man ignoring a committee. "You gave them stable," she said to Kent. "I gave them a bridge," he said. "We will cross it back to truth before night." Park stood with his back to the radiator as if borrowing warmth from an appliance might count as fellowship. "We go to the site," he said, "with GPR at dusk. Fewer eyes, fewer explanations to invent. "Not alone," Mary said. "Never alone," he said. And for once it wasn't policy but superstition. They ate in the kind of cafe that exists to keep British disasters civil. A plate of eggs that tried, mugs that apologized for tea, a waitress who called Kent love in a tone that made him wish to have been born braver. Dale set the reel on the bench beside him, hand on its strap, even when he lifted his fork. Greaves watched the door. Men in villages watch doors for storms and trouble. He watched for both. Mary stirred sugar into tea she would not drink. "He's older," she said, blinking not to clear tears but to reset the world to a version where words belonged. Not an hour older, not worse. Older, as if the day had been put on his bones with a trowel. "Does he know us?" Miller asked. "Yes," Mary said. "He knows us faster than the mirror knows him." Parks finished the eggs because his body had unionized and refused to do terror without protein. "There will be a leak," he said. "There always is. A porter will speak to a cousin. A boy will sell a story for beer. We will put out a statement with enough manners to make the paper stumble." "What will the statement say?" Dale asked. "That there is no ongoing risk," Parks said, then after the smallest beat, "and that we are very grateful to the council for their prompt action." "You are a poet," Mary said, and the sentence tasted like rust. At the hospital, Lowe asked for a mirror. The nurse refused him with such tenderness that he thanked her for it. "It's your job to keep the room honest," he said to Mary when they had a moment without straps, wires, or men with forms. "Do it when I am not handsome or brave." "You are very handsome," Mary said, and meant it the way one means that old maps are beautiful even when they are wrong. He smiled. The smile was simply his. "Did you pour it?" "We did," she said. "Concrete is a blanket. It is also a shore," he said. "Even monsters sleep when tide goes out." "Don't give it nouns it can wear," Mary said, and then surprised herself by touching his wrist in a way that meant, "Forgive me." He closed his eyes. "I can hear it less," he said, relief and grief struggling in the sentence like children in a bath. "But when I breathe deep, it finds the gap." She wanted to ask what gap. She did not. The body is a house of gaps and doors. You do not invite new tenants by pointing out the empty rooms. Kent came with a plan printed in his posture. Borrow the hospital's portable tape deck. Record Lowe's breath. Compare the graph to the tunnel's beat. Tell himself science exists to build dams against myth. Mary watched him assemble the frame of the idea. She let him have it until he reached for the deck. "Not today," she said. "We do not measure a man on the hour he is trying not to drown." Kent lowered his hand. Mary rarely issued orders. When she did, you obeyed if you intended to keep her as an ally after the world lost sense. Parks arrived with a folded ordnance map. He spread it on the windowsill and traced the hedgerows with a finger. "GPR at 1900, he said. "We run transects here, here, and here. If the slab is a lid, we will see what sits beneath the pot." "You are aware that looking is also feeding," Mary said. "I am aware of many things I'm not allowed to write," Parks said. "Take me," she said. He studied her the way men study a bridge before driving a heavy lorry across. "You'll stand behind me." "I'll stand where the ground will have me," she said. Kent closed his eyes in a fair imitation of prayer. "We do this as if we own no clocks," he said. "The only enemy that eats better than fear is haste. Dusk is when English fields decide whether to be haunted or merely historical." The cordon tape flickered against hedgerow like a poor man's bunting. Two constables stamped their feet in sync with boredom. The mixer's footprints in the lane had already lost their edges. Rain had offered to edit. Parks's van backed up to the perimeter with the reverse bell that makes villages hate science. A GPR unit, car battery heart, pram wheels, antenna like a polite insect, came down the ramp with Colin at its handle, holiness in his posture. He had the look of a young man about to ask a cathedral a question about resonance. "Transects 1 meter apart," Colin said, reverent as a choir boy listing saints. "We'll grid, we'll listen," Park said. "Grid after." They stepped onto the slab with a care that suggested sacrilege more than hazard. The concrete had taken the shape of patience. A line of moisture was drying along the edge where aggregate had flirted with capillary action. The seam beneath, invisible now, threw its cold up through the surface in a way only Mary could feel. She kept it to herself. "You do not tell the sea it is cold. It is." Colin pushed the array along the first line. The unit chirped and printed small hills and valleys on the screen. Strata, old pipes, the archaeology of ordinary. At the second line, the trace flattened, then threw a shadow down the graph that made Parks lean in. "Cavity?" he asked. "Or density shift," Colin said. "Or something that refuses to be counted." Third line, fourth. On the fifth, the unit hiccuped. A digital stutter at a frequency the manual never mentions because manufacturers do not write about rooms that desire. Colin frowned, tapped the screen with the gentleness technicians reserve for machines that must be coaxed rather than fixed. The trace sharpened, then blurred, then drew a soft, slow sinusoid that had no business in a soil survey. "What is that?" Parks asked. "Noise," Colin said, because vocabulary protects youth from nights they cannot tell their mothers about. Mary's jaw remembered the tunnel and answered before she could scold it. "Heart," she said. Park's mouth flattened. "It cannot be louder through concrete," he said, and then remembered that "cannot" is the sound an Englishman makes when the world has the bad manners to proceed without his permission. Colin adjusted gain. The sinusoid stabilized enough to become an insinuation rather than an insult. Along the seventh transect, the trace dipped and rose at 28 to 32 cycles a minute. Mary closed her eyes and counted, absurd and exact. 28, 30, 32. A pause. She opened her eyes and found Parks looking at her with a ferocity that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with witness. "You hear it," he said. "In my teeth," she said. "In my sternum. Like wanting." They worked the grid until the screen offered them an outline, not of a chamber, not of a void, but of a thickening that moved if you looked at it from the corner of your eye. Kent placed his palm near the slab. He did not touch. The air there was attentive. "I won't publish this," Colin said, voice small with an honesty that made Mary love him in the way teachers love students who refuse glamour. "I don't know what I'd be saying." "You'll file it," Parks said, "in a folder that will not leave a room, with a name that means nothing to anyone who hasn't touched chalk. Wiltshire, 1968, Tape B." Colin said, trying humor because humor sometimes passes for valve release. Nobody laughed. The field had no patience for valves. The constable at the tape lifted a hand. "Sir," he called, half question, half pardon. "There's a gentleman asking." At the lane stood a man with a camera that outclassed the village and a tie that had seen London. The local paper had overreached and pulled in a favor. He lifted the camera a fraction in greeting that pretended to be permission. "We've heard about a collapse," he said to Parks. "Rumors of a fatality. The public—" "No fatality," Parks said. He did not add yet. "No ongoing risk to public. Structural anomaly stabilized pending further assessment." "That's a mouthful," the man said. "Can I film the site?" "No," Parks said. "A statement on record?" "What I've said," Parks said. The man looked past him at the slab as if journalism could unlock it. "Is it a bunker?" "It's a stone," Parks said, and because the sentence was both ridiculous and truer than most public pronouncements, the journalist left with a photograph of tape and two men pretending to be interesting beside it. Night took the field in one long, courteous breath. Parks dismissed the constables with a promise of relief at midnight that both knew would fail. He sent Colin home with orders to sleep that neither believed would be obeyed. He remained with Kent and Mary because doctrine had been replaced by truce. "Do we pray?" Parks asked, not quite smiling. "We keep watch," Kent said. "It's the older ritual. They kept watch in shifts of staring." The heartbeat receded as concrete learned its chemistry. Wind found the hedge and practiced a hymn. A fox crossed the lane with the arrogance of night's first citizen. Mary thought of Lowe in his bed, hands still, chest stubborn. The way men breathe when they have been invited to a shore and would prefer a harbor. Near 10, Parks's phone rang. He stepped away to take it and returned with the look of a man who has been handed the wrong baby and told to pretend. "He's worsened," he said. "Registrar requests we attend if we intend to be the sort of people who attend." They left the field to the fox and the slab. In the car, the silence was not the peace of men with nothing to say, but the economy of men allocating breath for later. The hospital greeted them with the unnatural light that makes midnight edible. The nurse with oak arms stood in the doorway as if holding it up. "He's waiting for someone," she said. "Who?" Mary asked, instantly suspicious of any sentence that invites myth into medicine. "You," the nurse said, "or the man who thinks he's in charge of the slab." They went in together. Lowe had the exact color of paper set in sunlight, the warm gray of obligations kept. He smiled with the muscles that had not forgotten how. "It's quieter," he said, and then, after mustering, "Thank you." "You don't owe us thanks for blankets," Parks said. "I owe you for the part where you didn't let it learn my name," Lowe said. "Did you give it?" Mary asked. He looked ashamed and then not, the way children look when an adult asks if they took biscuits. "No," he said. "I wanted to. It felt polite." Mary took his hand and built a wall with that one absurd human brick. "Impoliteness is a sacrament," she said. "Use it when rooms listen." He closed his eyes. The monitors invented a narrative that medicine could read without turning to myth. After a minute that turned into 2, he said, "If you must go back, leave your watches. It eats the parts of a man that trust time." "We won't go back," Kent said. "Men go back," Lowe said, not meaning them, meaning the species. Silence moved its furniture. Outside the ward, someone laughed at a joke that had been told to keep despair from laying eggs. Inside, Parks took from his pocket the paragraph about structural anomalies and public safety, and folded it and unfolded it until the crease learned to be obedience. He put it away. "Tomorrow," he said, which is what men say when they are not ready to put a word like never into the air. "We keep the cordon, we say little. We wait." Lowe breathed as men breathe at the end of stories that do not end. "You'll hear it," he said, "even when you say you don't." He slept. Kent adjusted the blanket because culture demands a gesture when language fails. Mary sat and did not write. Parks stood at the window and watched his reflection practice the art of pretending to be the man in charge. In the small hours, the slab cooled another half-degree, and the heartbeat under it slowed to a patience older than county lines. In the hospital, a clock counted seconds, as if seconds were an honest currency. In the media room at the university, the reel sat in its canvas bag like a patient listening animal. In the corridor of the council building, the paragraph about structural anomalies waited on a table for a morning signature and a man with a rubber stamp. And in the hollow under the field, where stone remembers every footstep but never asks for names, the room breathed once, twice, as if to confirm its existence to itself. Then it was still with the stillness of a creature that can choose stillness the way other bodies choose sleep. Hospitals have a way of inventing afternoons after midnight, stretches of fluorescent day that ask you to pretend clocks are honest. It was in one of those counterfeit afternoons that Lowe's breath thinned to a thread. He slept without ceremony, the way exhausted men surrender a room and hope it leaves them unremarked. The registrar had found a word he could live with: palliative. and wore it like an amulet that fails, graciously. Mary dozed upright, a pencil still pinched between finger and thumb. Kent watched the second hand do its small, brave work. Parks stood at the window because windows let men face their reflections instead of their duties. At 02:11 by the ward clock, a number later disputed by every watch in their pockets, Lowe woke and asked for nothing. It is difficult to record a moment that refuses adjectives. His eyes were clear. He knew them. He held their names without dropping any. He smiled a boy's smile that had crossed a sea and returned without salt. "The room is full," he said softly. "Which room?" Kent asked, because doctors are taught to bring nouns to the bedside like flowers. "This one," Lowe said. Then, after a breath, "That one." The nurse checked a line, adjusted a blanket, did the arithmetic of comfort, and kept her ledger balanced as long as any person could. "If you are in pain," she began. "I am in time," he said, and the sentence was such a good line that later Dale will hate himself for not recording it. But Dale was not there. The world is cheap with ironies. For several minutes the ward made the hush it saves for births, deaths, reconciliations, and men who admit fear without shame. Then Parks's phone buzzed. He had set it to the courtesy mode that pretends silence and still announces urgency. He checked the screen, frowned, crossed to the corridor and answered because suits are taught to process summons the way lungs process air. The constable on the lane spoke through wind and duty. "Sir, sorry, but there's well, it looks like a trespass. We've a lad at the tape from the paper again and—" "Move him on," Parks said. "Politely?" "Already done, sir," the constable said. "It's the other one." "What other one?" "The gentleman in the field." Parks's breath changed temperature. "We have no gentleman in the field." "Well," the constable said, apologizing to English itself. "We do now." Parks looked at Kent through the door window and tapped his wrist where a watch should agree. Kent nodded without being told the noun. Mary stood, sleep dropping off her shoulders like an unused coat. "Stay," Kent said to her and meant with Lowe. She shook her head once, then saw the way the man's hand rested in the blanket, palm open like someone who has finally stopped carrying stones, and sat again. Parks and Kent left. The nurse with oak arms watched them go with the exhausted generosity of saints who are not fools. "Back soon," she told Lowe, as if the lie could be convinced to work a small miracle. The lane recognized their tires and offered no protest. Wind sped along Hawthorne as if rehearsing for a more dramatic weather. At the tape, the constable stamped his feet and lifted his chin at the field, the way you indicate a direction without confessing you have seen something you cannot categorize. "There," he said. On the slab, a man knelt with a care that can only be described as reverence. He was not young and not old in the way British men managed to defy categories by wearing good boots. He had set a lantern at the edge, the kind with a glass chimney and a collar you polish. The lantern's light pooled over the concrete like the liquid of another century. He had removed his watch and placed it on a folded handkerchief, a gesture so particular that Kent's stomach performed a small protest. "Sir," Parks called, the voice for sheep on roads and boys on roofs. "You'll need to come off the slab." The man looked up with the eyes of someone who recognizes authority and chooses courtesy instead of compliance. He stood, brushed dust from his knees, and left his boots exactly where they had stood. "Which is the sort of detail you record if you plan to testify later." "I am here for quiet," he said. His accent had the wobble of a man who had moved counties too often to be claimed by one. "You've been loud." "This is a secured site," Parks said. "You can have quiet in your own home." "The quiet I require is particular," the man said. "It lives below. I came to see if it would share." "Name," Kent said, "because names are bridges and you cross them if they hold." The man offered a smile that had once charmed supervisors and now belonged to a creature with fewer committees. "Dr. Leonard Reeves," he said. "Retired physics." I read the lad's paper and found the lane with my own feet. No trick in it. The chalk remembers. Parks recognized the name, not for genius, not for scandal, but for signing letters other men wrote. You're trespassing. I am visiting, Reeves said. Visiting is trespass with manners. Kent stepped onto the slab because arguments conducted at distances breed hubris. The concrete had cooled into the confidence of permanence. He could not hear the heartbeat. He could feel it in his jaw. What do you want, Dr. Reeves? He nodded toward his handkerchief and its watch. I wanted to see if the price was negotiable. Mary would have told him no politely. Parks said it the way policy says all mercy. It isn't. Reeves lifted the watch and slid it back over his wrist with the speed of a man who has learned to obey when he is outnumbered. I thought as much, he said. Still, bargaining is the only honest liturgy our species invented. We make offerings. We hope the house accepts with grace. You will leave, Parks said. I will, Reeves said, and then added the price he would have paid if someone had offered him the right liturgy. I would have gone in for 3 breaths and given it my name. You should seal tighter. He picked up his lantern. Keep your boys away, or send them with men who know how to call them back. He stepped off the slab, bowed in an old-fashioned way that manufactured dignity from the raw materials of absurdity, and went through the tape with the careful, law-abiding posture of professors who discovered too late they loved thresholds more than classrooms. Why do they find us? The constable asked no one. Because the earth has gossip, Kent said, and we are bad at keeping secrets from men with lanterns. Parks watched Reeves' back diminish into the lane, thought about appetite, thought about instructions. Double the rotation, he told the constable. No one on this slab without my signature and Kent's. Not farmers, not vicars, not men who miss the army. Yes, sir, the constable said, adopting the vowel structure for war and weddings. They stood a while in the wind and pretended they had not wanted to put palms flat to concrete to see if blood could hear other blood. Then they went back to the hospital, because loyalty is a map, and theirs had a bed circled on it. Lowe had not traveled far from where they had left him, but the shoreline had altered. His skin carried a color that does not live in paint, the soft ash of pages read by many hands. His eyes were open and simple. He seemed relieved by a small decision he had made. You went, he said. We went, Kent said. And the man? Lowe asked, because some knowledge arrives by rotes other than ears. He left, Parks said. Lowe nodded without the satisfaction of men who approve of other men's behavior. Good, he said. He looked at Mary, and for a moment the war did not exist and there were no tapes or suits or chalk lines, only 2 people remaining kind. You wanted to hear your name, Mary said gently. I did, he said. It hums the vowels the way your mother does when she's boiling something sweet. They held the hour like careful thieves holding a piece of glass. At 03:30 by one watch and 03:34 by the other, the registrar came and rearranged things politely, lines and injections and the grammar of ease. Lowe slept. When he woke, his breath had learned a new tense, not present, not quite past. Dale arrived with the dawn and 2 cups of coffee that had been brave somewhere else. He stood at the foot of the bed, looked at the man he had filmed at 8:17 2 mornings before, and understood that film lies in useful ways and is forgiven for it because our species does not survive truth without craft. Play it for me, Lowe said. What? Dale asked, though he knew. The tape, Lowe said. The bit where it speaks. He smiled. I want to hear the thing that wanted to hear me. The nurse started to say not advisable, and then did not. Dale set the small portable player on the bedside table and looked at Parks. Parks looked at Kent. Kent looked at Mary. She nodded once, not in approval but acknowledgement. This is the country we live in now. Dale pressed play. Hiss, chalk, rook, thermos, the low thud. He kept the volume small enough to pass for manners. At the pause, the hiss widened, prepared its chair, and the whisper sat. "He's hungry," the tape said. Lowe closed his eyes but did not make the face men make when they are frightened. He made the face men make when a truth puts its hand on their shoulder. "That's all," he said. "It's small." Mary's breath left her and returned with the reluctant courtesy of uninvited guests. "It is," she said. "It's very small." He slept without taking leave. Later, when they argued in other rooms about whether he had heard them say goodbye, Mary insisted the point was indecent. If the man had wanted to be present for departure, he would have been. Humanity is not a service you can be ordered to provide during shift changes. Time did the rest. It took him with the bureaucratic efficiency it displays when the poetic would make men ungovernable. The registrar wrote a line that had no Latin for tunnels in it. The nurse closed his eyes without the theater that keeps cousins grateful. Mary put the pencil down and could not find it later, no matter how she emptied her bag. Kent folded the blanket the way boys fold flags and hated himself for the sentimentality. Parks failed to make a phone call and succeeded in making a different one to a number that did not accept names. The ministry took possession of the form called Medical Certificate of Cause of Death, a phrase with the energy of a broom, and arranged a cremation with a speed that kept compassion from drying out. There were no flowers, because flowers are for gardens, and this was a gate. The three of them, Mary, Kent, Dale, stood on a strip of municipal grass, watchful of a curtain and a red light and a smell no language likes to admit. Parks stood apart and practiced the art of pretending he was there in another capacity. When it finished, nobody said amen. The earth did not open to receive. It already had what it had asked for, the slab cured. The hedgerow remembered its shape because hedges have the vanity of old aristocrats. The cordon withered at the same pace as any public patience. After a week, Parks reduced the watch to one man in the evening and one in the small hours. After another week, he replaced men with a sign and a lock. He did not believe either would suffice. He believed in them anyway because belief is another name for schedule. The council laid steel plate and then tarmac. Highways crews measured and poured and rolled and nodded with the confidence of tradesmen who let materials shoulder myth. A lorry passed, then another. The lane made the sound lanes make when the century insists. Mary returned alone on a morning that had the green smell of English lies. She parked beyond the bend and walked the verge as if she were listening for birds. At the slab's coordinates, now asphalt, now gesture, she stood, closed her eyes and held her teeth together gently. In the jaw, a hum. Not loud, not a threat. A presence doing the labor of waiting with dignity. She considered, then set her notebook on the tarmac, unspooled a small length of chalk from her pocket as a joke on ghosts, and drew a line invisible to everyone who needed to believe in road. She did not cross it. She spoke a sentence with the vowel of a prayer and the consonants of a reprimand. "You do not get our names," she said. "You will never get our names." Wind catalogued Hawthorne and moved on. Kent came twice more to stand without notebooks and remember without interpretation. He had the look of a man putting a word back in his mouth each time he nearly says it to the wrong audience. He did not publish. He taught introductions to stratigraphy with a new caution about metaphors. He retired 5 years later and found he could nap only in rooms where the walls were thinner than stone. Dale kept the reel in a canvas bag under a bed until mice took an interest in the canvas and a woman he loved suggested that obedience to tapes is not a career. He donated a copy to a cabinet without hinges in a building that changes names when governments do. He kept one copy on a shelf between books on light. Now and then, he played the hiss and the heartbeat and the whisper, for himself and for one friend at a time, and watched their jaws for the moment of recognition he could not film. Parks wrote his paragraphs, signed them, filed them, defended them. He said no ongoing risk, not as a lie, but as a promise he asked the world to keep on his behalf. He returned to the lane once at dusk, alone, left his watch on the passenger seat, stood on the tarmac, and listened in his teeth. He did not stay long. He is not a man who believes he is owed indulgences by rooms that predate jurisdiction. The hedgerow thickened. The fox had children and taught them lanes. The farmer told a story in the pub about a collapse and a fine that was fair. The constable retired and kept the habit of stamping his feet when waiting for buses. The nurse taught 3 new hires to tuck blankets with respect and never to surrender mirrors, no matter how polite the request. The registrar filled in lines and lines and lines until one day, someone else filled in his. The tape exists. It is carried down hallways in folders with names that will be changed when the decade requires repagination. It is played in rooms with air that smells like coil and paper, and sentences that begin for the avoidance of doubt. It is stopped always in the same spot, just after the whisper sits. Men clear their throats and women make notes, and everyone practices a face that says procedure while their molars hum. If you drive that lane in Wiltshire on a day that makes hedgerows larger than their shrubs, you can cross the seam without knowing you've done something religious. If you stop and stand and close your mouth and bring your teeth lightly together, you might hear a low argument continuing below. Something patient, something small, a heartbeat too large for a chest and too steady for a machine. If you do, you will be tempted to tell it your name. Politeness is a disease of our archipelago. Resist. We do not name it. It has no right to us. The file goes in a drawer with several keys and the habit of not being there when asked for. The lost expeditions will tell the story without the adjective final. We will roll the tape to the hiss, to the heart, to the whisper, and stop where we always stop, because liturgies keep men from breaking. He's hungry, it says. We are too, but our hunger does not belong to holes in chalk. End.